in an increasingly polarized Congress, it seems. How would you, in your next term, if reelected again, how would you interact with members of the opposing party?
Well, yes, successfully. By taking a business person's approach to it and concentrate on areas of agreement. That's one thing I've certainly noticed coming from the private sector, where you only succeed if you focus on areas of agreement. I've got a product, you want to buy it, now we can haggle over the price. Unfortunately, in politics, way too many people exacerbate divides and divisions. We saw President Biden do that last week in that awful speech. But so I've just always concentrated on areas of agreement, and I've got a very successful track record of doing so. As chairman of Homeland Security, out of my committee, we passed 300 pieces of legislation, which I always call them nonpartisan. They identified a problem and they tried to solve it. Over 130 of those became law in some way, shape, or form. And, some pretty significant pieces of legislation. We established the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. In times when cybersecurity is a huge issue, that's an important step. Piece of legislation countering the malign use of drones. So that's the kind of thing I would concentrate on, not things that would grow government, but things that actually use government the way it should be used to keep us safe and secure. My right to try legislation is another example of that. That was passed by unanimous consent. Now, that took years to get it to that point, working with all the interested parties, but in the end, that passed by unanimous consent on the Senate floor, and then the House passed it a few months later. So the bottom line is the way you deal with the other side is you just focus on areas of agreement and try and just things that you're not going to agree on, put that off for another day.
Yeah. What is your thought on the filibuster, and then specifically, do you support ending the filibuster, and why or why not?
No, we should not end the filibuster. It forces a more deliberative process. When you are going to pass a major piece of legislation that could have major implications for our society, that could produce major change, that kind of legislation ought to be debated not only in Congress but within the public. So you develop a level of public consensus so it'll stand the test of time. And the filibuster is certainly one of those things that requires a 60-vote threshold, and that's what this really is. You have to get 60 votes.
Yeah.
You have to have a larger majority in the Senate to pass something, and that's, I think that's an important thing to maintain, so we just don't have, just a whipsaw effect with changing Congresses, changing administrations, where you just go from one position to the next. It would really be a very unstable situation in this country. So the Senate, with that filibuster, produces some measure of stability, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. So I'll throw out a kind of a scenario, see what you would do with this one. So we'll presume you win re-election. And then hypothetically, let's say another Supreme Court justice were to pass away or maybe resign, hypothetically around February of 2024. What is your feeling? Should the U.S. Senate consider President Biden's nominee, or would you push for waiting until you saw who won the November 2024 presidential election first? Why or why not?
Well, this is hypothetical, and exactly how I would view it would depend on the circumstances. But I will point out the politicization of Supreme Court nominations really started with Democrats borking Robert Bork. Joe Biden in June of 1992 was really the first U.S. Senator as chairman of the Judiciary Committee that talked about how President Bush, the first President Bush, shouldn't even name a nominee until after the November election. And so the Judiciary Committee should seriously consider not scheduling confirmation hearings. So, he's really the first one to kind of, we call this the Biden rule. Said in an election year, let the American people decide through the election. And of course, Chuck Schumer in July 2007, basically a year and a few months ahead of the 2008 election, said that we should not confirm any Bush nominee to the Supreme Court. George W. Bush in this time. And, of course, it was Harry Reid in November 2013 that used the nuclear option and changed the rules of the Senate with just 51 votes so he could ram through some D.C. circuit judges. So if you take a look at the record of who has violated the norms of the Senate, who has, time and again changed the precedent of the Senate, it's the Democrats. And when you change those precedents, well, the other side then uses those precedents to their advantage as well. So it's just hard to say. You're asking me a hypothetical, but the people who laid the groundwork for not, basically letting the American people decide the composition of the Supreme Court through November election was really set by Biden and Schumer and quite honestly, Harry Reid.
Yeah. A little bit lighter. Name one particular Wisconsinite who stands out in your head, who's a big inspiration to you. If you had to pick one, I know there's a lot of wonderful Wisconsinites out there.
I have to name two.
Okay, go for it.
First is Polly Williams, who was a hero to me. I was fortunate enough to meet her before she passed, but I mean, she really is the person. And there are a lot of people involved. I don't want to downplay other people's involvement in getting school choice in Wisconsin, which was really a national leadership effort here. I mean, we led the way with school choice, providing opportunity for children trapped in failing schools. So Polly Williams, then, of course, my friend who's also passed, Pastor Jerome Smith, who worked with me on the Joseph Project, and we transformed lives. He transformed lives. It's just a pretty simple program where we reinstill the imperative to commit yourself to success and have the right attitude, and you can really transform your life by getting a good paying career type of job. So I can't just choose one. It's got to be two, Polly Williams and Pastor Jerome Smith.
Absolutely. So who do you consider, if you're elected now for your third term, who do you see as your allies? What fellow senators do you look forward to continuing to work with?
Well, again, depending on the issue, I'll work with anybody. Where we find those areas of agreement to affect positive change. But I think my core group would be the unfortunately smaller group of fiscal conservatives who are concerned about mortgaging our children's future. I wish we were a much larger group, but unfortunately, elected officials do realize that voting people benefits is something politically popular to do, which is why we're $30.8 trillion in debt, have deficits of over $1 trillion per year with no end in sight. So, my core group of allies would be that group of fiscal conservatives that are concerned about a looming debt crisis and the mortgaging of our children's future.
Yep. And I know you touched on several of your accomplishments already, but I guess if you had to maybe, we'll say, pick three that qualify you for another term in the Senate, what are the three biggest accomplishments that you had looking back on your time in office so far?
Well, I think just in general, what I accomplished as chairman of Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. I mean, those 300 bills, 130 became law. I mean, the truths that I was able to reveal, it's really pretty remarkable, how much in my investigations I did reveal. We released the struck page text. We uncovered the fact that the FBI knew that the Steele dossier was tainted with Russian disinformation well before they set up the Mueller probe. We obviously uncovered the vast web of foreign financial entanglements of Hunter Biden. So, my legislative accomplishments as chairman, but also the truths that I was able to reveal through my investigations would be, I would say, a major accomplishment. Very few U.S. senators can say that they pretty well single-handedly made sure that 95% of American businesses got a tax cut so they can compete with the big guys. Mm-hmm. And I've had the reaction since that from many of them saying that your tax cut helped us survive the pandemic as well. Yeah. So I know that's being used, it's being completely distorted, like I cut out some special deal for myself and a couple of buddies. There were more than 20 million tax filers taking advantage of that tax cut. And had it not been for me, those 20 million tax filers would have been put at a huge competitive disadvantage to the C Corps, the 5% of American businesses that the initial Republican tax reform only cut their taxes. So I bucked my party. I dug my heels in. I withstood the scorn of many in Wisconsin talk radio. Took the snarly phone calls from the Oval Office, and held my ground and made sure that those 95% of American businesses could stay competitive. And as I said, many of them told me, "Boy, without that tax cut, we would not have survived the pandemic." So I'm pretty proud of that. Mm-hmm. Then I think the third accomplishment, I don't think there are many members of Congress can also claim pretty much single-handedly that they passed a piece of legislation that is literally saving people's lives, and that's what Right to Try does. I am the guy that championed that. I'm the one that worked tirelessly for years, working with people to get it passed. And you may have seen the commercials. Even during COVID, there's a drug that is being used at end-stage COVID. Unfortunately, it's not widely available, but it's being made available through Right to Try. It's called Zysamy, a Viptidil. It's been around. It's been used as I think they call it a lung surfactant for preemie babies to help them develop their lungs, but we've got some doctors using that. There's a doctor I talked to in Houston. She used it on 19 patients. And again, these people are days from death. They're on ventilators. They're going to die. They're signing their last wills and testament. And she said 16 of the 19 walked out of the hospital healed. I asked her, well, what kind of damage do they have? And she said, no, Senator, they walked out of the hospital healed. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty proud of that. It's being used in other areas. I hear all the time from doctors, calling me up or emailing me, thank you for your Right to Try. I was able to save somebody's life or improve their medical condition significantly because I was able to use this, and it sure seemed to work. So I don't know. I think those are of many, and I could keep going on, but if you're going to limit to three, I think those are three. No, again, I'm serious. I'm pretty proud of those accomplishments.
Yeah. What single, and maybe this is even harder because I'm going to just do one. What single issue do you feel is the most critical to Wisconsinites overall? But then I'll throw back the same question, except specifically impacting the people here also in the far northwest part of our state, which obviously we're very different from Milwaukee and Madison.
Well, it is difficult to nail down to one when you take a look at what I always call the list of horribles. The 40-year high inflation, rising gas prices, rising crime, baby formula shortages, the open border, the flood of deadly drugs. So, those are significant problems. And by the way, they didn't just happen. People need to understand this. The Biden administration isn't just unlucky that all these things are happening on their watch. No, they caused them all. I was amazed when Vice President Harris went down to Central America looking for the root cause of the flood of illegal immigrants, and so just walk into the Oval Office. The root cause is sitting right behind that desk. But if I've got to narrow it to one, I'll go back to why I ran in 2010, the mortgage of our children's future. The out-of-control deficit spending, what I would consider a looming debt crisis. And nobody knows when it's going to finally hit. But it could hit rapidly, and it could be devastating. But the fact that we are now $30.8 trillion in debt, that we're seeing certainly the impact or the results of that just in 8.5% inflation. Inflation, as Milton Friedman said, is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And so when you print trillions of dollars of money we don't have, you have all these dollars chasing too few goods. You spend those dollars on benefits that allow people to sit on the sidelines, not enter the workforce. Find a manufacturer that can hire enough people here in Wisconsin. They can't fill their shifts. They can't meet demand for their products, so you can have fewer products being chased by trillions of dollars that we just printed. So again, it's that out-of-control deficit spending, our growing and unsustainable debt that could just result in a calamity. And for the most part, people in Washington, D.C. are just whistling by the graveyard. I find it astounding. I'm an accountant. I abhor debt, personally as well as publicly. There's certainly rationale for debt to buy long-term capital goods, that type of thing, house mortgage, that type of thing. But we just we're fortunate to be the world's reserve currency, so we're not feeling the real impact of this completely reckless and irresponsible deficit spending and growing debt. But that would be the number one. Of all the things we're dealing right now, again, that could just be a calamity. It was so weak in America. The impact it would have in terms of geopolitics and encourage our adversaries to become even more aggressive. I mean, just what it would do to people. Inflation hurts everybody, but it is particularly hard hitting on seniors on a fixed income, people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. The very people the Democrats purport to want to represent, it's their policies that are doing the most harm to them.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the readers of the Inter-County Leader or folks listening to us on our website?
Yeah, let me just kind of summarize. As I travel around Wisconsin, I think as much as people are struggling with the disastrous results of Democrat policies and governance, I think their main concern is we're just losing this country. They hate, as do I, hate the division and the anger.
Yeah.
President Biden said on his inaugural address, number one goal is going to be to unify and heal this nation. I would argue he's done the exact opposite. So what I am calling on Wisconsinites, if you love this country, I think most people do, if you're concerned about his future and you see the polls, 75-80% think we're on the wrong path, join us. Help us unify, heal, and save this country. The house divided cannot stand. We need to unify. But you have to unify around the truth.
Yeah.
And, what I'm certainly finding in this election is, my election is largely truth versus lies, distortion, character assassination, the politics of personal destruction. It's not fun being on the receiving end of lies and character assassination and the politics of personal destruction. But my goal has always been, and this is what I promise, I'll always tell you the truth. I'll never vote or conduct myself with my re-election mind, and I've scrupulously honored those two promises. I'll continue to tell people the truth even when they're truths that people don't necessarily want to hear.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you making time for us.